rest of the encyclical now, and then at... Oh, brother, that's not gonna... At 4:30, I think we'll have a look at, take a glance at Michael Davis's book on religious living in Vatican II. Again, I've done a one-page chart of that book, and it's good. It's well done. So that gives you what happened to this doctrine at Vatican II, and they simply just changed it to fit the modern world, quite simply. But I hope that will enable you to see the man-centered version of liberty and the God-centered version of liberty. It's not basically very complicated, but by golly, that document was, the document on religious liberty, Vatican II, was so cleverly done that all of the bishops, most of the bishops fell for it. And finally the document was voted through. This is cleverly done. It's a real weasel thing. So, we might have a look at the document itself, but that's difficult because it's so slippery. It's a real quicksand. Because it keeps appealing to your emotions and making you feel good, and then at the same time it brings in the traditional doctrine and it tries to fit the two together. How the two fit together. It's a masterpiece of reconciling the irreconcilable. And it can only have been done by somebody who was deeply convinced that there's no real clash.
Wasn't that
John de Courtenay Murray, yes. Yes, it was. But he didn't know his... Well, they say that back in the early 40s he did know his Catholic doctrine. But then he changed it, so... All right, let's have a look at the false liberty of speech. 23, that's not very complicated. As for liberty of the press, it means oppression of the people by subtle, flattering, and deadly errors. And that's, of course, exactly what you see today, in fact. What we have today is the media which are just lying through their teeth all the time, and the people buy it. The people buy it. It's skillfully done. The people are flattered, the people are cajoled, the people are deceived, and that's what freedom of the press means. I don't know what Thomas Jefferson would have said if he'd seen today's press. Would he still have said freedom of the press was a good thing? But today's press isn't free. Today's press is actually strictly censored, but in the opposite direction. And yet the people think it's free. So that's the result of liberty of the press. What was Thomas Jefferson essentially missing out on? What did he just leave out of account? Original sin, that's it, yeah. I mean, this is where Catholics stay in touch with reality, where all the liberals are just way out in the left field. The liberals don't believe in original sin, and that they just get everything wrong as a result, because original sin is a fact. Liberty of teaching. What the doctrine and then how the church has behaved in the matter. As for liberty of teaching, in other words, freedom to teach what you like, is likewise contrary to the good of men's minds, which is truth alone. You see that, what's that an example of again? The good of men's minds is the truth. What's that, what's he doing there that we did here?
He is God. He is thoughts.
Yes, when you say that the good of men's mind is truth, what are you saying?
There's something outside.
There's something outside. In other words, the mind has an end outside of itself, which is truth. And the liberals say the truth is shutting in my own mind, so I am the measure of truth. The liberals say I am the measure of truth. The Catholics say the truth is the measure of truth. The truth is the measure of my mind. The liberal says my mind is the measure of truth. The truth is whatever my mind makes it. That's insane. But the Catholic says it's whatever is out there that's the measure of my mind. I mean, on this desk there are 2 books and not 3 or 5 or 15. There's the Libertas, and then there's the purple book, and then there's a few papers, but there are 2 books and not 3, not 1, not 15. The reality is the measure of my mind. But the liberal doesn't like that. Why not? Because I'm restricted. I'm not at liberty to say that there are 3 books or 5 books. It's very restrictive to say there are only 2 books, to be only able to say that there are 2 books. And that's their attitude. As long as the object is imposing itself on me, I don't have real liberty. Therefore, I am going to liberate my mind from the object, and then I will have liberty. It's insanity. You see what liberty means to them? Liberty means my affirmation that I am the God and creator. I am in control. I am even in control of whether this is purple or green or pink or brown or black. These people are insane.
Do they also deny truth as being absolute and immutable too?
Absolutely they deny it. Absolutely they deny it. Truth is just what men make it. Jim.
I think it's sort of like the improvement that was made on Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Some said, no, actually it's backwards. You got it backwards. I am, therefore I think. I think you can make a case for that with what you're saying here, that people who think it true, tell the truth when the truth is out there.
Yes. Yes, Descartes is the beginning of modern philosophy. His thinking is coming in front of reality. I think, therefore I am. The reality of me comes after the reality of my thinking. So if I want to think that I'm an elephant, I think I'm an elephant, therefore I am an elephant. You know, I mean, he's putting thinking in front. But reality is in front, not thinking. Thinking always comes after reality. Because you can't think something thunk without its being real. For anything to be thunk or thought, it's got to be a reality. Even if I think of a unicorn which doesn't really exist, what am I doing?
You're creating it in that sense.
Creating it in that sense, but what am I creating it out of? Things that are a reality. There's one animal that does have a horn, and there are other animals like a horse that have 4 legs and a block, a trunk, and that don't have a horn. But I put together the horn of one animal, which is real, with thoughts must always go back to reality. That's what Catholics say. Even fantastical thoughts have to go back somehow to some reality. But the liberals say, no, my mind is completely free. I can make up what I like in my mind, and that is the measure of reality. Where ought people to finish up who make their minds the measure of reality? Who make their minds, if they make their minds into the measure of reality, where should they finish up?
Insane.
Correct, in the funny farms. Why don't they finish up? Why don't all these liberals finish up in the funny farms? David?
I think because the good sense God gave every man keeps him from carrying it to its logical extreme.
Yes. In other words, they're very selective. For instance, when they want to walk out of this room, do you think any of them says that my thought says that that is a door? Funnily enough, all of them finish up saying, my thought says that that's a door. And so funnily enough, despite what they think, they all happen to walk out of the door. They're very, very selective about where their system kicks in and where it doesn't. And as you say, therefore their common sense enables them to exist. Supposing they came down in the morning and looked at that cup of black coffee and said, my thought says that that's poison. Where would they finish up? They'd finish up somewhat hungry and thirsty, wouldn't they? They aren't hungry and thirsty. Why? Because funnily enough, when it comes to judging that little, thinking that little black cup funnily enough, then they decide that that is coffee.
Satan don't mean anything by their thinking that it's poison. But he does mean every type of thought, which...
Well, yeah, their mind, you know, they're selective, where they choose when to control reality by their thinking, and when to, by chance, make their thinking coincide with reality.
Who controls that? Do they, as a human?
Oh, yes.
Is there an outside?
Oh, no, they as humans, they may be under the influence of Satan, but it's with their free will that they use this system of selective real reality and selective virtual reality, or selective my reality and selective out there reality. They choose.
Each time?
Oh, of course. Each time they get into the car, they crank the starter. They don't crank the trafficator. what do you call that?
Once souls, so to speak, down the river, they're zombies under a...
Their minds are selectively unhooked from reality. That's the truth of the matter. And therefore they stay enough in touch with reality to survive, but they stay out of touch with reality enough not to have to adore the real God, enough to make themselves into God. In fact, they're in contradiction. They're contradicting themselves all the time. They survive thanks to their common sense. They kick out God thanks to their craziness. And then they fit somehow or other, they fit the craziness and the common sense together.
And they run for politics.
And then they run for politics, you bet. But it's not just the politicians' fault. The people love these politicians who tell them, you'll get something for nothing. Anybody can get something for nothing, and I guarantee you something for nothing. That's the sure way to get voted in. So the people love it. It's not the politicians' fault. It's the people's fault. It's the dumb people that elect these politicians. They're all at fault.
There has to be a starting point for them, though, doesn't there?
The starting point for...
Starting point. In other words,
Does it start
they
with...
don't all go to school to learn this. They are this way. They choose to be this way. I can't follow their thinking.
They are now taught this way in school. In school, their minds are disconnected from reality, and in the universities. If you go to any modern university and want to study philosophy, the first philosophy course will nearly always be disconnecting your mind from the senses. You'll be given examples to prove that your senses are not reliable. For instance, when you were asleep, you thought you were being chased by a great elephant, and then you woke up, and that proves that your senses were completely unreliable, right? That's how they argue. Or you put a stick in water, and it looks as though the stick is bent, but you know perfectly well the stick isn't bent, because you pull it out again, it's perfectly straight. Therefore, your senses are unreliable, see? And they've got various other examples of that. They line up a number of... So my senses don't tell me what's out there, so I don't know what's out there. Therefore, I'm free to say what's out there. That's the way modern philosophy works. It's crazy.
Well, fine for those who go to school, but for those who don't and have the same thinking, that seems...
Where do they pick it up?
Where do they get it? You know?
From the newspaper, from the media, from television, from the media. All of the television people think this way. All the university professors think this way, all the schools think this way. And through the media, it just catches everybody.
The psychiatrist touch?
You were also told it there, yes. You're also told it by the psychiatrists.
Well, I know some people who haven't been to college, they're just high school graduates.
Right.
They're out working there.
Right.
In the field working. And they think this way.
Yes.
They haven't been, they probably don't watch that much television either, some of them don't.
But it's...
Still, their thinking is...
That's right. Well said, because this thinking is now everywhere. Everybody's doing it, as the expression goes. Everybody's thinking it. Everybody's thinking like this. It's taken time to get to that point, but it's over the last 20, 30 years, it's snowballed, especially since the Church unhooked from reality with Vatican II. As long as the Catholic Church was still anchored in reality, something held. There was some resistance and there was an anchor. But when the Catholic Church gave up, that was the end of the game. The game was over, so to speak. Yeah? When the Catholic Church said that virtual reality is real reality, that fantasy is reality, and when the Catholic Church hitched up her skirts and began jiving and rocking and rolling like everybody else.
Well, I'm not even sure that some of the people I know would understand that. It's just that they've picked it up. Their thinking is just like this.
That's it.
I've wondered how in the world they've come to this conclusion. How can they...
Because everybody around them is like it.
Okay.
And it's filtered from the top downwards. It's filtered from the universities downwards, especially from the universities. Okay. Immanuel Kant, who's at the back of all of this, we may look at Pascendi tomorrow because that's so basic. Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher back at the beginning of the end of the 1700s, the beginning of the 1800s. And then he was a rare case. but it's just snowballed. It's snowballed through German philosophy into French and English philosophy, from philosophy into the other departments of the university, from the universities into the schools, from the universities to the schools into the media, the universities, the schools, and the media into the people. That's how it works. But it was launched by a university professor, Immanuel Kant, in Königsberg. So Pius X said, Il Kantismo è l'eresia moderna. Kantism is the modern heresy, meaning this unhooking of the mind from reality. We may take a look at it tomorrow. It's very basic, very, very basic. And it's the explanation of what you meet with whenever you walk into a Novus Ordo church. But it's also the expression of what you meet with in the workplace and everywhere today. And that's why, yes, they are, exactly. And that's why if you've got a head which still works, it's like talking Greek to all of these people whose heads don't work. The head is capable of committing suicide. I mean, how can a comparison? You know, if I'm driving a motor car and I, you know, take a yank on the brake cable so that the brake cable comes up, I'm capable of destroying the brake cable, but once I've yanked it up, I can't put it back. And the car from then on was without brakes. If I use my mind to pull up the anchor in reality, I can pull it up. But I said it's going to take a very special grace to put it back. And so long as the anchor is pulled up, my mind is just floating all over the place. Some people like having floating minds. A lot of people like having floating minds. They're free from reality. I don't have to pay the mortgage bill because the mortgage bill is unreal. I don't have to pay this, I don't have to listen to this, I don't have to take that. And then when the wife comes home and says, hey, that's nonsense, what does he turn around and say to her? I don't have to take that from you. I don't have to take that from anybody. I don't have to take that. I'm floating free. I don't have to take reality. So get lost. She, poor gal, you know, then just flips her lid. What can she do? The men are going, people today are crazy. They are literally crazy. But they are selectively crazy. They stay in touch with reality enough to walk through the door rather than try walking through the wall. But the logical conclusions, David Perry says, their common sense means that they don't apply the system completely logically. But if they were completely logical about the stick being crooked in the water, and therefore I can't rely on my senses, if they were completely logical, I would have to go around all the wall groping to try to find the door, and even then, how would I know that my hands were telling me the truth? My senses are lying, right? I would feel that I couldn't even try to walk to the door. I would go crazy. They don't go crazy. They don't go, at least clinically crazy. They don't go clinically crazy because their common sense keeps going enough to make sure that they survive. But they are ideologically crazy. And the mass of people walking around, walking up and down the street today are ideologically crazy.
Well, perhaps that also explains the prevalence of mental disease.
Yes.
Schizophrenia is essentially
yes.
this carried to truth. I mean, these people really
yes.
trust their senses.
Yes.
They might be clinically crazy if they lived in not a crazy world, but when everyone around them
exactly.
think the same way.
Exactly.
I mean,
then it's perfectly normal.
Professor Feather got put all the crazy people now in charge, and all the sane people are the straitjackets, and everybody's crazy.
That's right. That is, in my opinion, that is basically John Paul II's problem. Because he, with this crazy thinking, honestly thinks that it's completely normal. And insofar as everybody else thinks the same thing, it is normal. All the cardinals, all the bishops, except for a few, they all think it's normal. And therefore, as far as he's concerned, it's normal.
Is this because the grace of their knowledge has been withdrawn because they turned their back on the Lord?
Yes.
Rather, it's law. I mean,
yeah, they've
average Joe is a bishop or cardinal or like that.
They've turned their backs on God.
Very intellectual people. They say their word.
Yeah, but the more intellectual are, the more stupid they are. Very often today. Today, the fact that they've gone through, the more university degrees somebody has got today, the more you want to be suspicious whether he's got any sanity left. University degrees today are not an indication of sanity, they're a very likely indicator of insanity. So, you know, the world has gone completely mad. Let me give you a graphic example of a friend of mine. He said, in the military, what was it? Oh gosh. Oh, he had, women in combat. You know, they put women on the US Navy ships now. And they've not had time to change the accommodations on the ships. So you can imagine what. So this ship was docking in New York. This is just a couple of months ago. Was docking in New York, and the captain and lieutenantesses, or lieutenantess, the officers and officeresses, or officerettes, in other words, the women officers, they went to some nightclub in New York and they began dancing, and finally the nightclub had to throw them out. They came back to the ship, and the captain by this time was highly interested in one of the officeresses, and he told the sailors that since she had had a little much to drink, she would need to be watched over for the night, and he would do the watching over. Well, the rest you can imagine. He's been fired. I mean, he lost his command of the ship, of course. It lasted the whole night. And, but it's inevitable. It's absolutely inevitable. To say, you know, to put men and women together on a ship and then send them to sea, I mean, they are crazy if they think this kind of thing isn't going to happen. But they absolutely solemnly pretend, everybody pretends to everybody else that this is not going to happen. And then it happens, of course, every single time. They're already spaced out.
But she's been up in space for 3 weeks.
Oh, man.
Several months. There's a 6-week extension on that.
She's got 3 or 4 kids at home.
Oh. Do you remember that one there was a woman on board Challenger when Challenger blew up, and she had 2 young children. Oh. It's insanity, absolute insanity. Yes, I think there is. You know, you know, this craziness. The Pope is trying to say, look, guys, there's a reality out there. There's a purpose out there. There's a heaven out there which we've got to get to. And so we need to limit natural liberty to moral liberty, and we need laws in order to guide natural liberty to being moral liberty. But these people know there's no such thing. There's nothing out there. We are it. We are it. You know, Toys R Us, and we are it. We are it, period. Okay, so let's just pull up our skirts and enjoy ourselves, eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we die. It's insanity. But it's the way everybody is today. Therefore, it's completely normal. In the old days, insane people used to be abnormal. Today, they're normal. And so everybody, and there's a pressure, there's a positive pressure to join everybody else in the insanity. Because so long as you resist being insane like everybody else, you stick out. And you're an implied criticism of their craziness. So they're pressuring you to join in the craziness. They don't want you to go on reminding them that there is something outside of man which judges man and which measures man. But the Pope said it. The popes argued this, but people didn't listen. Some people listened to the popes, but not enough. And so finally in the 1960s, the popes gave up and said, okay, guys, we'll pull up our skirts too and enjoy ourselves, so let's get jiving. And now I hope everybody, you will love us and be nice to us, because we're fooling around just like you're fooling around. And that's the way it is today. So let's have a look at what Leo said. Liberty of the press means oppressing the people by subtle, flattering, and deadly errors. Liberty of teaching is contrary to the good of men's minds, which is truth. See, the Pope says the good of a man's will is the objective good which is out there, and the good of a man's mind is the truth which is out there. Therefore, the mind, as Chesterton said, he said it very well, I always thought that a person opened his mouth only to, he said, I always thought that an open mind was like an open mouth. A man opens his mouth only in order to close it again on something he's eating. If you open your mouth, it's in order to put something in and eat it, and close your mouth and eat it. If you open your mind, it's in order to put something in your mind, reckon that it's true, and once you know that it's true, close your mind on the truth and shut out error. But no, the liberal, the open mind is a value in itself, because there's no such thing as truth. So the more birds that come in and then leave their droppings and fly out again, the better. That's how the liberal sees the life of the mind.
Because there's no beauty. I mean, it's no beauty. There's no morality.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing.
That's right.
A valueless system.
That's it. No morality, no beauty, no values, no standards, no nothing except just what I like from one moment to the next. What suits me, what I like from one moment to the next. It's insanity. But the good of men's minds is truth. And it's only truth. And there is a truth out there which men's minds can reach. But do you know, there was a seminarian from California, where else, who told me that he went home one day. I mean, the seminarian was listening to all of this in the seminary. He went home one Christmas vacation, and he was talking to his grandparents, who were good people. They're paying for him for his tuition at the seminary. And he said he got into a discussion with them, and he said, well, now, and you know, they sure enough, they got back to basics, and they got back to reality. And he said, look, 2 and 2 is 4, he said. Do you know what his grandfather answered? Grandfather, not just some 22-year-old juvenile delinquent, but his grandfather. His grandfather said, yes, but give our computers a little longer, and 2 and 2 will no longer be limited to being 5. That's what his grandfather said to him. In other words, computers are a great help in unhooking people's minds from reality. Or people, sinners, use computers in order to help unhook their minds from reality. It's not the computer's fault. But let's say that the existence of the computers doesn't hinder any. So, liberty of teaching must be controlled, both for natural truths, which are the very bond of society, and for supernatural truths, because if you disregard supernatural truths, it means everlasting perdition. And so, teaching must be controlled, it must be censored, it must be Catholic censored. If you teach natural error, it's going to unhinge society, says the Pope, which natural society hangs together by natural truth. And if you disregard natural truth, you're going to destroy natural society. And then as for supernatural truth, if you teach the opposite of supernatural truth, which is heresy, you're going to send souls to hell. So if you want society to survive, and if you want souls to go to heaven and not to go to hell, you've got to Catholic censor teaching. And you can't afford to have the classrooms with anybody just saying anything. It's clear, it's absolutely clear. But that's assuming, of course, that there is a reality out there, which is exactly what your modern people have finished up by denying. There's a famous Latin saying which says, those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. And the gods surely want to destroy modern Western civilization, because modern Western civilization is just gone mad. It's gone mad. Not clinically, but ideologically mad. That's freedom of teaching. What does the church do? The latter, the supernatural truths, guard the natural truths. That's an important point. The supernatural truths are like the outer covering of the natural truths. For instance, the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption of our Blessed Lady. In other words, that Our Lady's life began with an immense privilege of an Immaculate Conception free of original sin, and that her time on earth ended with the immense privilege of her being assumed body and soul to heaven, gives to this woman a tremendous dignity and value which spins off on all women. You can't make, if those two things are true, the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption, there's a limit to what filth you can tip out onto woman. Therefore, the nature of woman is protected. The natural truth about woman, the truth about woman naturally, is protected by these glorious supernatural truths. The great supernatural truths are the protection of the natural dignity of woman. Whereas if you strip away the great supernatural truths, you're free to destroy, to attack and destroy the natural dignity of woman. The supernatural dignity of woman is like a shield protecting the natural dignity of woman. And that's why these popes, Pope Pius IX and Pope Pius XII, defined these two dogmas in our terrible modern age, which strips woman of all dignity. The Catholic Church defends the natural dignity of woman by block defending the supernatural privileges of the Mother of God. Therefore, that's why he says, 27, the supernatural truths guard and protect the natural truths. The Church guards both, and by guarding both, promotes the true liberty of minds to achieve the truth which is outside of those minds. Therefore, the Church is the defender of the true liberty of the mind. The true liberty of the mind is to get access to the truth. That's the real liberty of the mind. Like the liberty of the Boeing is to fly across the Atlantic, the real liberty of the mind is to fly to the truth. And the Church protects the truth and protects the mind getting to the truth. Therefore, the Church is the defender of real liberty. Therefore, when the Church censors teaching in the classrooms, she's protecting the real liberty of the minds. She's protecting this liberty of the mind by controlling this liberty of the mind. The Church is not condemning the natural liberty of the mind. The Church is simply limiting the natural liberty so that it won't crash but will fly to the truth. So that it won't crash into error but will fly to the truth. Therefore, the Masons are liars when they say that the Church is against scientific research, the Church is against science, the Church is against freedom of research. It's lies, absolute lies. The Church is not, the Church is the mother of all universities all real universities down the ages. The Masons don't produce universities, or if they do, they're monkey universities, they're Mickey Mouse universities. Or they're modeled on the old Catholic universities, but it's the Catholic Church that has always built universities. The Freemasons empty and make a monkey of the universities. Look at Berkeley today. That's not a university, that's a monkey den. Very little pursuit of truth going on in Berkeley because there's very little Catholicism in Berkeley. But here in the United States recently, in the Catholic universities, you get all of these idiotic, supposedly Catholic teachers saying, we want more liberty. The Church must give us more liberty. The Church gives them liberty by censoring the nonsense, by controlling the nonsense. If you eliminate the faults out of the 747, it's going to be free to fly. But if you leave all the engine full of faults, it's going to crash. The Church engineers go in and clean out the faults from people's minds by her censorship, and then the minds can fly to the truth. So, the Church guards both natural truth and supernatural truth, and therefore promotes real liberty, which is the liberty of the mind to fly to the truth. Likewise, history shows that by defending the faith, the Church has favored all true learning. There would be no modern science if there hadn't been the medieval Catholic Church. No way. And yet liberals want all license. They want all license, all false freedom for their teaching. They want to be able to teach lies or truth regardless, because they want to be free. They don't want to have a truth out there which is checking them. They want to talk any nonsense they like. And they want all license for their own teaching, and they want no freedom for the truth of the Church. They're delinquents. They're satanic. Liberals are satanic. Liberals are rodents. If you take one thing away from these 4 days, remember that. Liberals are rodents. R-O-D-E-N-T-S. Liberals are rodents. They are. All right. The best of them are unconscious of the fact, but the worst know perfectly well that they're rodents. In any case, whether they know it or not, they are rodents. They're gnawing away and destroying everything. All right. We move on to liberty of conscience. As for liberty of conscience, to worship at will, in other words, to worship any kind of worship is nonsense. That's natural. That I have a right to go for moral liberty or license in matters of religion is nonsense. That I have a right to go for what the church teaches in matters of religion, absolutely true. So, liberty of conscience, if by it you mean just any religion at all, that's nonsense. But if you mean liberty to be a Catholic, that's absolutely true. That's Christian. But this freedom to obey God is, as far as the liberals are concerned, an attack on their state. Because you're restricting their liberty to worship whatever worship they like. Therefore, the same principle applies. In all four, worship, speech, teaching, or conscience, in all of those four freedoms, it's always the same. There is an end to attain which is the real liberty, and there is a modern version by which there's no end outside of man, and he becomes his own end, and that is craziness. And each of those four cases, you've got exactly the same pattern. The doctrine of tolerance is very important. 32 to 35. Sure enough, the liberties of the liberals, the false liberties that the liberals have preached, man is his own end and man can do, just has a right to do whatever he likes, they have proved a grave and bitter disappointment. But in order to avoid a greater evil, the church may tolerate but never approve these false liberties. There's the doctrine. There has to be a justice. In order to tolerate a false liberty or to tolerate error, there must be a higher good, because to tolerate error is not a good thing. Because you're allowing the destruction of minds, you're allowing heresy, you're allowing damnation of souls. Therefore, it's not a good thing to tolerate error. If the church tolerates error, it's in order to achieve a greater good, which is the eventual conversion, for instance, of a number of souls who would not be converted, who would be anti-converted if I tried crashing in and censoring without their understanding what's going on. So the church has the right to back off exercising her rights, or exercising the rights of truth, in order to achieve a greater good. And that's the church's right to exercise tolerance. But it's not a duty to exercise tolerance. In no way, time, or place is it a duty to exercise tolerance. Because error has no rights. And therefore error never has rights. However, all such tolerance of evil for the common good or for a greater good is a sign of imperfection. And so if you've got a liberal society where the church has to tolerate a lot of evil, it's an imperfection and not a perfection. Today, people pride themselves on their tolerance. They pride themselves on what they think that to tolerate evil is a mark of perfection. Look at me, I'm tolerant. But it isn't a mark of perfection at all. It's a mark of an imperfect situation where you can't do better than tolerate evil. Better would be to eliminate evil. It's a sign of imperfection. And the tolerance of evil, Catholic tolerance, has nothing to do with the tolerance by liberals of error for its own sake. See, again, the Catholic Church may be driven in practice to tolerate for the sake of a higher good. But the liberals don't tolerate as a second best. For liberals, toleration is a first best. Toleration is an ideal. Just like sincerity is an ideal. What's more important for a mind, sincerity or truth? Truth, yes. Objective truth is more important than subjective sincerity. Subjectively, I think that this river is perfectly, sincerely, I think this river is perfectly safe to swim in. I sincerely think so. Well, that's not going to help if the river is in fact treacherous. Doesn't matter what I sincerely think. The important thing is to think the truth about the river, not think whatever I think sincerely. It's obvious, it's common sense. You come up to this bridge which is over the river, and just as you're about to drive onto the bridge, somebody says, the engineer who built this bridge was very sincere. Oh yes? He sincerely thought that he knew as much as the engineers that had gone through university. Oh yes? You mean he didn't go through university? No, he sincerely thought it didn't matter. Oh? So, and he designed his bridge according to what he sincerely thought? Yes. Thanks very much, I'll find another bridge. It doesn't matter how sincere he is. You know, either the bridge is properly built or it isn't. And what you need to know about the bridge is not whether the engineer was sincere. You need to know whether the bridge is truly built in accordance with the laws of engineering. That's what you need. It doesn't matter how sincere Mohammedans and Jews and Buddhists and Hindus are. As Mohammedans, Buddhists, Hindus and Jews, they're not going to get to heaven. It doesn't matter how sincere they are, normally speaking. What I want to know is not the religion which will make me sincerely feel, or make me feel sincere and tingly all over. What I want is the religion which is going to get me to heaven, whether it makes me feel tingly all over or not. That's a good journalist phrase. It made me feel tingly and sincere all over. That's exactly it. That's this modern slush. That's it. Did our Lord feel sincere and tingly all over when he was on the cross? No, I'll bet you he didn't. Bet you he felt pretty darned horrible. But that's where he was meant to be. That's where he was. We thank him for it. Without him being on that cross, we would all of us be in one blank of a mess. But it wasn't thanks to his feeling tingly that you and I got saved. It's thanks to his doing what was objectively right and obeying the truth that you and I are saved. All right. So Michael Davis will pick up again this question of tolerance or toleration. Toleration is a second-rate virtue. It's an imperfect virtue. It's a virtue which you have to exercise in an imperfect situation. So we move on to the conclusion. Leo concludes. Firstly, he has a summary, and then secondly, he has an overview of the rights of man. And notice, revolution, democracy, and independence. And he measures those things by the Catholic faith. Revolution, he says, is not necessarily a bad thing. Democracy is not necessarily a bad thing. Independence is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as all three are in accordance with truth and justice. In other words, out there's a moral measure of these things. If these things are in line with the measure, fine. If they aren't, they're no good. So, well, let's have a look at his summary. Firstly, the essential vice of liberalism, 36. In brief, liberalism throws off the authority of God, and it's the authority of God which alone, by, for instance, the Ten Commandments, can direct man to fly safely to his destination. So it's the authority of God and the law of God which guides natural liberty to make it into moral liberty and make sure that a man saves his soul. But the liberals throw off the authority of God. They throw off good and evil. They throw off any measure out there, and they make themselves the measure of what's right and wrong. They make themselves God. They throw off the authority of God. And then 37 to 41, this is interesting again. He's got various grades of liberalism. Archbishop Lefebvre always used to say, it's a French expression, there are 36 kinds of liberalism. I mean, there are 36 grades. You've got all shades of liberalism. And one and the same man can be an extremist in the morning and a moderate in the afternoon and then an anti-liberal in the evening and then back to being a liberal the following day. It's terrible. I mean, you go to your local parish priest and you say to him, Father, I'd love a Tridentine Mass because I really dig the Tridentine Mass. He says, yes, I agree with you. What you don't see is that in the evening, Miss Progressive Hijinks goes to see him, and she says, Father, I would like an absolutely up-to-date Mass. And he says, yes, I agree with you. So, you see, and then Cardinal Ratzinger says the traditional Mass is a good thing, but then the Novus Ordo Mass is also a good thing, and it's a good thing for the Mohammedans to do the Mohammedan thing, and that's liberal traditionalism. We aren't liberal traditionals. The Tridentine Mass is the law of God and it's the requirement of God. God demands that we all celebrate the sacrifice of his Son with a proper rite. It's not a permission or a consent to celebrate the Tridentine Mass. It is a command and an order, unless and until the Pope one day is to issue a rite which is at least as serious and at least as traditional as the Tridentine Rite. Then we would be obliged to celebrate that instead. But it's difficult to imagine how he could make a rite as traditional as the Tridentine Rite. So for the time being, at least, the Tridentine Rite is it. And the Tridentine Rite is a command. It's not an option or a choice.
Is that a tape-off from the Last Supper, who this in commemoration of me and the authority that he vested in Peter and
Yes,
the apostles
yes,
to
yes.
form his church and what?
Yes, but he did not give to his popes authority to change the whole thing around. He gave his popes authority to make minor changes, for instance, introduce the Feast of the Sacred Heart. That came in after the Tridentine Mass. The Feast of the Immaculate Heart came in after the Tridentine Rite. The details the popes can change, but the popes have no right to throw the whole thing over and bring in something brand new. So he then again grades it. Look at the gradation from 37 to 41. Firstly, God is completely rejected. But then God is accepted, but the church is rejected. The church is completely rejected, 38. God is accepted, but the church is partly rejected, 39 and 40. And then 41 is the most subtle and probably the most dangerous of all. God is accepted, and the church is accepted, but the church needs to be adapted. That's exactly Vatican II. So you can see here again the gradation of liberalism. He had a bit of that gradation in 15, 16, 17, 18, where we saw radical liberalism and then moderate liberalism. Here he's got it more finely calibrated. Firstly, God rejected. Absolute liberalism throws off God absolutely in public and in private. Moderate liberalism throws off, quote-unquote, only the supernatural law, which leads to separation of church and state. That's the American system, and the English system as well. Some separators are for the state disregarding the church altogether. Others are for the state, again, quote-unquote, only depriving the church of her rights as a perfect society. In other words, some of the liberals are extremists, some of them are more subtle, but the end result is the same, says Leo. With God, it's all or nothing. You've got to give God all that he wants, and if you take away anything, you're disregarding God. If you disregard God in one thing, you're disregarding him in everything. Because the real God demands to be regarded in everything. And if I have a right to disregard him in anything, he's not the real God. He's just a pussycat. And if I have a right to undo one stitch, then I have the right to undo all the other stitches as well, and logically all the other stitches will come undone. So, others are for the state only, depriving the church of her rights as a perfect society. Others, again, are for the state, even recognizing the church and even recognizing her rights, just so long as, there's always a little poison in the tail, just so long as she gets with it. In other words, we love God, we believe in God, we love the Catholic Church, we believe in the Catholic Church, we believe in the Catholic Church's rights, but she does need to lift up her skirts a bit and get with it. The Archbishop said, Jesus Christ is neither liberal nor reformable. He does not need to get with it. Pius IX said it in his famous syllabus of 1864. The Catholic Church does not need to get with it, is what he said. Or he said, the Catholic Church needs to get with it, proposition condemned. Damnable proposition. The Catholic Church does not need to get with it. The Catholic Church is always old and always new. It's always fresh. It's always up to date. The great truths of our Lord are always up to date. Always and everywhere up to date. They just need applying. And so you've got there the gradation of liberalism. And then, as I said, he comes into the rights of man. Therefore, it follows, man has no right to unconditional lack of constraint. In other words, the free use, the unlimited use of his natural liberty. Man has no right to the unlimited use of his free will in any domain. In every domain, free will must be channeled into moral liberty by law, the law concerning that domain. Man has a right to revolt only for the liberty of the people or for the liberty of the church from evil and to do good. The American Revolution was not wholly unjustified. What's a Catholic judgment upon the American Revolution? That's an interesting question, and you need to study the whole thing from a Catholic point of view. But the drama is that from the very beginning of the Catholic Church in the United States, the churchmen were Americanists. starting with Carroll, starting with Archbishop Carroll.
Wasn't his brother the head of the Masonic Lodge?
Something like that. Something like that, yes.
He was a member of the Masonic.
Was I a member? Yeah. Yeah.
He was the head of it. Yep. According
Yeah.
to Solange Hunt.
Solange Hertz, yes. She's good. She's a bit hard, but she's good. She's on the ball. She is on the ball. Solange Hertz, S-O-L-A-N-G-E. Her books are well worth reading. I think you're entitled, in my humble opinion, you're entitled to take them with a pinch of salt here and there. But generally, she's much, much more right than she is wrong.
She's easy read, too.
Yes, yeah. Solange Hertz. There are very few that are as clear and straight as she is.
Star-Spangled Heresy explained to you.
The Star-Spangled Heresy, Utopia, and what's another one? There's a third one that's come out. I forget. But on this question of Americanism, the Solange Hertz, the Star-Spangled Heresy is very good.
That explains a lot.
Yeah. Star-Spangled Heresy.
That's where she accused Carroll of being.
Yes, yeah. She's surely right. Unfortunately, she doesn't always quote her sources, so you can't sort of back up what but she's right. She's right. Man has a right to revolt for the church's liberty from evil to do good. For instance, when Franco rose up in revolt against communism in Spain in the 1930s, that was an absolutely justified revolt. It was a popular revolt led by Franco and the Spanish officers against Bolshevik communism, which had taken over in Spain and was smashing the Catholic Church. And the Catholics rose up, and they had every right to. There's an example. So not every revolution is wrong. And the American Revolution was not completely wrong, as I was saying to you, because the British monarchy was far from completely right, because the British monarchy had kicked the Catholic Church in the teeth. Therefore, it was justice that the British monarchy in turn got kicked in the teeth. Unfortunately, George Washington, however, didn't, instead of going back to the Catholic Church, brought in a new system which, etc., etc., etc. So we saw that yesterday. All right. Then a man has a right to self-government only if he recognizes that all authority comes from God. Authority does not come from the people, says Leo XIII. Authority comes from God. In which case, all participation of people in public affairs is approved by the church. If you've got a people, every one of whom recognizes that authority comes from God, there's nothing wrong with a democracy. Nothing wrong.
The South Dakota motto is, under God, the people rule.
That's a tongue twister.
Yeah, take a little thought. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you see, that sounds like they're putting together the two things.
Yeah.
It would be the under God part is good. And apparently that was only put on US coins in the 1950s. It's interesting, yeah. There was some godliness in the United States. There was some godliness in the United States as late as the 1950s. And that's what made the strength of the United States and the glory of the United States. And finally, he has a right to independence and a right to property only in subordination to justice. So the question of independence is a question of justice, and the question of property is a question of justice, which again is a measure out there, and all Catholic moral theology is a measure out there of how man behaves. If man does what the law says, then he's right, and if he doesn't do he's wrong. Man is a measured and judged and subordinate creature. That's what the Masons don't want. They want man to be God. David.
I have a question, Excellency.
Yes, sure.
You were defining naturalism as the over-exaggeration of nature.
Yes.
And liberalism as the over-exaggeration of liberty.
Yes.
Could you reconcile that for me with what Leo XIII is saying here, where liberalism is the implementation of naturalism in the moral and political realm?
Liberalism is the implementation of naturalism in the moral and political realm. Yes, in other words, liberty of action. naturalism is the theoretical principle. He said they're making a distinction of nature in things, in being, the nature of being, and then liberty in action. So as action follows being, so liberalism follows naturalism. If you want to think of naturalism as belonging to the realm of being and liberalism as belonging to the realm of action, yes. Yes. Liberty applies to action, so liberalism is the exaggeration of liberty in action, and it follows from naturalism, which is the exaggeration of nature over supernature in the line of being. Does that make sense? The old principle is that action follows being. I mean, I have to exist before I can act. Action follows being. This thing is round, therefore, in action, it rolls. If it was square in being, it would not roll in action. Action follows being. It's common sense. So liberalism, the Pope then is saying, is in the realm of action, whereas naturalism is in the realm of being. But I think my broad qualification still applies, namely that that's why they're called that. Liberalism, liber in Latin is free, and naturalism, that's nature's, and the isms are the exaggerations. Okay? But you might say that, in that respect, liberalism in action follows from naturalism in thinking about being, yes. Any other questions for the moment? Yes, Doctor.
Your summary...
runs out of gas at the bottom?
Well,
that's just...
You're summarizing that the Pope says that man has, quote, a right to self-government, close quote, only if he recognizes all authority to be from God.
Yes.
In which case all participation in public affairs is approved.
All public participation, the people. Yes.
Okay. Is that really possible? It would seem...
That's another question.
Okay, because it would seem that if you say, well, we're all unspotted Catholics, and we know authority comes from God, but we're going to elect this mayor, or we're going to elect this representative, or elect this senator, with time, you're still going to start thinking that the authority is in your hands.
Yes, I know what you're saying.
And it seems funny to...
Yes. There is that built-in danger of democracy, but if you've got a people of saints, if you have a people of saints, that danger will be diminished.
That's why monarchy is a symbolic...
That is why...
I'm sorry?
Isn't that built into every system, though? I mean, if you've got a monarchy, it's going to tend eventually to be the divine right of kings. I mean, I am king. I mean,
I don't know if I agree with that. I think
well,
that
the history is that's what happened. I mean, that's history. I mean, even Louis XIV, the Catholic king, fought divine right of kings.
Well, what we're saying is...
They stopped, they taught sin law.
Any one of the three systems, broadly there are three systems: democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy, right? Ruled by one, ruled by a few, ruled by the people. There are those three systems. And in fact, any system is usually a mixture of those three. You rarely meet, there's practically never a system which is purely one or the one. If you have a people, the people nevertheless need a ruling class and usually some individual. And if you've got a ruling class, they usually need one amongst them to sort of guide, and then there's got to be some participation by the people. So that in the United States today, you've got, it's a democracy so-called, but nevertheless you have Congress, which is a kind of aristocracy, and you've got a president. You've got a one and a few and the people. Under Louis XIV, you had it was a monarchy, it was called a monarchy, but in fact there was also an aristocracy immediately under him, and then a lot of power actually devolved down by the principle of subsidiarity, and there was a lot of power went down the tree. It was not all up at the top. So in fact any system is likely to include all three, and each has its danger. But the particular danger of the democracy is that the people are liable to think that they are the source of authority. That is the danger. Given human nature, that is the danger of democracy. Given human nature, the danger of monarchy is that they may be tempted to turn into tyrants. How well monarchy has served the church and how well democracy has served the church is something that you have to study by looking at all the ages of history. And there, I think you have to admit that the monarchy, many more Catholic countries have been essentially monarchic than they've been essentially democratic. Some of you will have seen this before, this little flyer on, it's called The Meltdown of Catholicism. And there's a beautiful picture of the Vatican melting. Well, St. Peter's in Rome melting. And it's an overview of the book by Michael Davis, The Second Vatican Council on Religious Liberty. It's a very good book. Michael Davis is now I think the chairman of Una Voce. He's got quite a high position. He's a very good writer, very good brain, and very scholarly, very thorough in what he writes, especially his books. But he has one drawback, and that is that he wants to sell conservatism to traditionalists, and then he wants to sell tradition to conservatives. In other words, he wants to stop, as he sees it, stop traditionalists going too far away from the church. That's how he sees it. But at the same time, stop the conservatives from getting too liberal. So he's sort of dancing across that side of the church from one part to the other. So he's a little disturbing in some of the things he says, and you can't completely rely upon him. On the other hand, there's some things which are absolutely excellent. And this book is excellent. So it's an overview of the book. When we were looking at Leo XIII, we did not see, well, we did see the principle of religious liberty, the false liberty, the liberty of conscience, the liberty of worship. So we did see what he said about it, about these false liberties. But he obviously never imagined that it would get into the church. But religious liberty is one of those principles, like ecumenism, which really means the meltdown of Catholicism. I mean, the Catholic Church just can't stand this kind of principle. It's like a seller of ice who somebody would persuade that he ought to, you know, market his product out in the middle of a sunlit field. I mean, if you sell ice in the middle of brilliant sunshine, you're not going to have much left to sell after a couple of hours. So if you try to apply within the Catholic Church the principle of religious liberty, that men have the right to, that the state must allow equal rights to all religions, you're in dead trouble. Let's have a look. So look at the center panel on the back, or the front. Why meltdown? You've got a center panel there, why meltdown, on the other side. The principle of religious liberty means, briefly, that the state must allow equal rights to all religions. You saw that in Leo XIII, namely that, you know, that the state, while the individual may submit to the Catholicism, the state has no right to submit to one religion. The state must stay open to all religions. That's the principle of religious liberty. That's the First Amendment. In appearance, such a principle is favorable to religion in general and to all religions in particular. In appearance. And in appearance, the United States is friendly to religion. But in reality, it is most harmful to religion, especially to the Catholic religion. Because if you give liberty to all religions, what are you saying? They're all the same. They're all truth. They're all equally true. Now, if they contradict one another and they're all equally true, then they are also all equally false. If they're all equally true and equally false, then what do truth and falsehood matter? At any rate, in the domain of religion, nothing. Truth and falsehood may still apply in the domain of engineering, but in the domain of religion, truth and falsehood is just nothing. Therefore, since I want my children to learn truth in schools, what's the logical consequence in the schools? Throw out religion. Get religion out of the schools. Therefore, the First Amendment leads logically to getting religion out of the schools. See, The poor liberals, they say no, the decent liberals say no, 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 the First Amendment means that we should have religion in the schools, liberty for all religions in the schools. But liberty for all religions means that no one religion is completely true, that it doesn't, the truth and falsehood in any of these religions doesn't matter, in which case, what can any of it matter? It's a waste of time. Get rid of it. And that's logical. In reality, the principle of religiosity is most harmful to religion, especially to the Catholic religion. That is why cunning enemies of the Catholic Church love and promote religious liberty, whereas the popes always used to condemn it. The reason is because man is created by God for God. So there you can see whoever wrote this flyer is after the same point, namely that man has an end outside himself, and that end is God. And God, the end outside of man, is the measure of man. Man is created by God for God, to go to God by the one religion which God instituted and which he sealed with his precious blood for that purpose. God matters, the true religion matters, the truth matters. Whereas religious liberty says truth doesn't matter. It doesn't say it openly, but it doesn't say it explicitly, but it says it implicitly. Actions speak louder than words. And by the action of insisting upon tolerating all religions, by that action you say that truth or falsehood in any of these religions doesn't matter. You don't say it in words. In words you say, oh no, maybe any of these is true. I'm not saying that they're not true. I'm just saying they must all have equal rights. Hey, if you say they must all have equal rights, then what you're saying is that whether one of them is true or false doesn't matter. One of them could be completely false, but you on your principle would still defend it. Therefore, truth and falsehood don't matter for you on your principle of religious liberty. Again, religious liberty means that man is an end in himself, and that he must choose what religion he likes. He is the measure of what religion he is to choose and practice. He's an end in himself. Whereas if God is the end of man, and especially if God has revealed one religion, then man must obey that religion, and there can be no right of religious liberty for any other religion. It's clear. So the true religion matters and truth matters on the Catholic understanding. We Catholics know that. But now comes any state with religious liberty saying, in actions that speak louder than words, that all religions, whether they're man-made or God-made, are acceptable. But all religions contradict one another, from which it follows that if all religions are acceptable and all religions are contradictory, then contradictions are acceptable. If contradiction is acceptable, then truth in religion doesn't matter, and if truth in religion doesn't matter, then no truth matters. Truth in engineering is a small thing. No truth in anything human matters. This profound discrediting of truth means the discrediting of the human mind, which is made for truth. If the truth is valueless, what value is my mind? Therefore, what do you observe the youngsters doing with their minds? They blast them to pieces. Boom, 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 boom. Because the mind is useless. What point is there in cultivating the mind? What point is there in education? We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. Teachers leave us kids alone. Anyone know that? It's logical. Pink Floyd is logical, completely logical. This profound discrediting of the human mind of all its ideas, let alone the idea of God, leaves, since the mind is discredited, then sentiment and feeling become king. You've decapitated the mind, so all that's left is the heart. And that's why we've got the slush-mush society. Because the mind has been completely discredited. Hence, religious liberty may defuse religious divisions amongst men. You may stop by persuading the Catholics of religious liberty and persuading the Protestants of religious liberty. You may stop the Catholics and Protestants fighting one another, which is exactly what Pope John Paul II is all the time trying to do. Let's have peace amongst men by nobody taking any of their religion really seriously, not even us Catholics. We're prepared to trash our Catholicism just so long as we all get together and are happy together. Religious liberty may defuse religious divisions amongst men, but it can only unite men in a sentimental humanitarian mush which is neither manly nor godly. That's where modern man comes from, and that's why we've got today's triumph of trash. We've got the trash society, because man is just slush and mush, because the reason is decapitated, because truth is of no importance. So all that matters is slush and mush, and enjoy yourself with all the slush mush pleasures that you can lay hands on as fast as you can. It's logical. How and why religious liberty always used to be condemned by the Catholic Church, and how with Vatican II religious liberty at last conquered many churchmen, is the dramatic story told in Michael Davis's book and summarized within. So here's his book. In 25 chapters and 7 appendices. Michael Davis is always quite fond of appendices. He thinks of something else, so he sticks another appendix on. An introduction, 2 chapters. Then he presents the truth, like Pope Leo XIII, he gives us the truth firstly, because this is such a confusing and difficult question. Then he presents the error, 9 to 12. Then he presents the clash between the truth and error at Vatican II, the 4 sessions, 62, 63, 64, 65. Then he presents the fruits of the clash, which are, or were, the Declaration on Religious Liberty, which is the terrible document, the terrible final document of the Council, promulgated in 1965. And then we've got the aftermath. Very interesting, the aftermath. Father Murray died in 1967, and Michael Davis tells us he was promoting artificial means of birth control. He was defending, in 60-67, he was defending contraception. And that tells us what kind of a man he was. You know, he was just a man out of sync with Catholic truth. So, let's go to the introduction. The introduction, Michael Davis is handling difficult ideas, so he puts it into concrete people. And there's one particular clash that embodies this clash of ideas, and that's the clash. November 11, 1963, at a doctrinal meeting in Rome, an American Monsignor and an American Jesuit clashed. The American Monsignor was Monsignor Fenton, and Monsignor Fenton was an American who vigorously defended the true doctrine, the true Catholic doctrine. And Michael Davis's book is dedicated to Monsignor Fenton. He's dead now, but it's dedicated to the memory of Monsignor Joseph Clifford Fenton, editor of the American Ecclesiastical Review, 1944 to 1963, whose clear, consistent, and courageous defense of papal teaching on church and state must once again be vindicated as the authentic Catholic position. So that's the dedication of the book. On the other side was the liberal Jesuit, Father Courtney Murray, who became a folk hero because he defended religious liberty. Interestingly enough, Father Courtney Murray taught at Fordham University in New York. And I think it's Dr. Marrow who told me that when Father Murray came back from the council, he expected to be treated like a hero because he had done so much dirty work for the liberals at the council. So the liberals ought to have made a hero of him. Do you know what the liberals did? He was already out of date. He had done that dirty work, but they were already on the next stage. So he was old hat. He wasn't a hero. Wanted to be, but he wasn't. At least at Fordham University he wasn't such a hero. But for the many liberals he was a hero, but not in his own university because they'd moved on, and you know, he was... The revolution eats its own children, as they say, you know, vum, vum, vum. You don't come down and then lay out and everybody admires you and loves you. No, if you pull the thing down, it will be pulled down underneath you, and you'll be left high and dry. That's what happened to Father Courtney Murray at any rate at Fordham University. The Catholic doctrine on religious liberty. Remember, the religious liberty is the doctrine that, you've got that on the back there, the state must allow equal rights to all religions. And remember that Leo XIII said that that's nonsense, that's absurd. Okay. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You've got true and false liberty. You've then got the state, the nature of the state, the state's duty to Christ, the state's duty as to heresy. Papal quotes backing that up. The Catholic doctrine of the common good, which allows, which does allow toleration. For the sake of the common good, the Catholic Church has a right to tolerate error. But the Catholic Church never, never, never has the right to approve of error. It may tolerate it in order to achieve a greater good, but it may absolutely not approve of error. So, the church teaches that 1, true liberty is to obey God's law. That's moral liberty, obviously. To do as one likes, in other words, I have a right to do anything that my free will wishes to do, is false liberty. True liberty is moral liberty, to go to the end, to fly across the Atlantic. Natural liberty is a false liberty of man being an end in himself. Right? Natural liberty substituting for moral liberty is a false liberty. Natural liberty, the basis of moral liberty, is not false. It's absolutely necessary. But natural liberty is substituting for moral liberty. In other words, moral liberty and license being wiped out because you wipe out the difference between good and evil, that's completely false. Okay? So, 2, the state is a creature of God because God created all the little individuals with their little blue streak, and therefore God created any society, any human society that comes into existence is also a creature of God. It's a creature composed of the sociality fitted together of all the individuals making up that society, however big or small it is. Therefore, the state must worship God, and the state must do what it can to bring men to God, because the state is a creature that owes its adoration to God and service to God. 3, every state must submit to Jesus Christ the King, because the one true God took flesh as Jesus Christ and took flesh as king. Jesus Christ was king. Are you king, says Pilate? You have said it, says our Lord. Yes, I am. And therefore the state should favor and protect Catholicism because it is the one true religion. If Catholicism wasn't the one true religion, there'd be no need to protect it. But if it is, then it must be protected by the state. 4, any Catholic state has the right to repress heresy in public, but it may tolerate heresy as a lesser evil than repressing it. If a Catholic state, by repressing heresy, was to drive everybody up in arms, to make the newspapers and everybody go crazy, then the wisest thing is to back off, because you're not going to convert souls by that. But nevertheless, a Catholic state has the right to suppress heresy. It has the right to abstain from suppressing it, but it also has the right to suppress it. It does not have the right to approve of heresy. And it does not have the right to give any rights to heresy. It can give toleration to heresy, but it may not give any rights to heresy. Heresy has no rights. It may have toleration, but it cannot have any rights. Finally, the measure of whether a Catholic state should repress heresy or tolerate it in public is the common good. Meaning, what will do the most good for the most people in this state? If suppression of heresy will do the most good, then the Catholic state will go ahead and do that. But if toleration of heresy will do more good to most people, because otherwise they'll all be up in arms and hating the Catholic Church, then toleration is the best in the circumstances. It's an imperfect best. It's a second best, but it may still be the best in the circumstances. So that's the Catholic doctrine. The liberal doctrine, he's got in six propositions. Michael Davis lays out in 6 propositions, of which a summary like this can only give a very, very brief idea. The liberals teach that human reason is the highest authority. Michael Davis is obviously quoting Leo XIII, Libertas, and therefore church and state must be separated. Human reason is the highest authority, therefore the church has no right to be brought into the state as an authority above the state. And if the church claims that kind of authority, then the church and the state must be separated, because human reason rules. It's reason that rules and not the Catholic Church. Therefore, reason will rule the state, men will rule the state, and the Catholic Church can do what it likes. But the Catholic Church will have nothing to do with the state. Therefore, reason rules and church and state must be separated. That's liberal doctrine. Very briefly, we may come back to that and lay it out a little more. The champion of that doctrine was this Father John Courtney Murray, an American Jesuit then who died in 1967. He must have been born around the turn of the century. He was a liberal Catholic, he was a lover of the world, and he was an Americanist. 10. Thus, Father Murray taught that all men have a natural right to practice in public their own religion. That's what Father Murray was teaching before the council, and that's what he persuaded the council to adopt as doctrine. It's completely false. Men do not have a natural right to practice false religions in public. Every man has a natural right to practice the one true religion in public, but no man has any right to practice a false religion in public. He may be tolerated by the state, but he has no right to be tolerated. All he has is the right of the state to abstain from persecuting him if it'll be for the common good. But heresy has no rights. In this, Father Murray was wanting to conform Catholic doctrine to the outlook of contemporary man. Michael Davis has a lot of quotes about, undoubtedly, I can't remember the chapter, but it's a number of quotes proving that this is modern man's attitude. So Michael Davis, Father Murray was once again wanting to fit the church to the world instead of wanting to fit the world to the church. Jesus said, "Going, teach all nations," not "Go and adapt to all nations." Go, teach all nations what I have commanded you, and baptize them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, and behold, I'm with you until the end of the world. But he said, teach all nations. He did not say, adapt to all nations. Father Murray was wanting to conform Catholic doctrine to the outlook of contemporary man, or to the outlook of the USA Constitution. Friend and foe alike, both Father Murray's enemies and his friends considered that he was an Americanist, namely, somebody who wanted the American doctrine of religious liberty to be transferred into the Catholic Church, to be adopted by the Catholic Church. And that's exactly what Vatican II did. And that's why Father Murray is called an Americanist. He was an American by nationality, and he wanted the church to take over the idea of the great idea of the liberal American Constitution. The clash. So there we've got the truth, which is the old-fashioned Catholic doctrine, and now we've got the error, which is represented in modern times by John Courtney Murray, and Father John Courtney Murray in particular. Now we come to the clash, which was when the error and the truth met head-on. And there were 4 stages. The Second Vatican Council was where the error and the truth clashed, and the Second Vatican Council had 4 sessions. 1962, 1963, 64, 65. It was autumn of each year. Autumn 62, autumn 63, autumn 64, autumn 65. They would begin sort of September, October, and they would run right through till November or December. So it began with 1962. In 1962, you get firstly tradition rejected, so the ground is cleared of the truth for the junk to come in. Secondly, the Americans move in because there were a lot of American bishops who were convinced that the best thing that the church could do was to adopt American liberal doctrine. In other words, a lot of the American Catholic bishops were not really Catholic, unfortunately. 64, there was a bitter fight. Archbishop Lefebvre and some other old-fashioned bishops took a stand in favor of the old-fashioned truth, but by 1965, it was the liberals who triumphed. That was that terrible council. 13. At Vatican II, firstly, the traditional schema on religious toleration was thrown out. There was a schema drawn up prior to the council under Cardinal Ottaviani, and Archbishop Lefebvre took part in it, as I think he said. And the Archbishop says that that schema was completely orthodox and classical. And notice, it didn't talk about religious liberty, it talked about religious toleration, which is quite a different thing. But Bayer, Cardinal Bayer, also had a schema on religious liberty. So the traditional schema on religious toleration was thrown out, together with a lot of other traditional schemas or prepared documents. They were all just tossed out. They took 2 years to prepare, and the Archbishop says they were very well done. They were a real adaptation of the truth, without changing the truth, to modern times. But the Council Fathers weren't content with that. The Council Fathers were liberals. They didn't want a Catholic adaptation They wanted a liberal adaptation. So after the schema was thrown out, the Secretariat for Christian Unity took over. The Archbishop Lefebvre always used to say that that's a very sinister organization, the Secretariat for Christianity. It was a means of getting around the classical Roman congregations. The Curia, the Roman Curia, was built like a series of roadblocks in the way of error. One congregation, the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, one congregation or another would block error. So to get round all of those, the Pope built a new organization called the Secretariat for Christian Unity, which would be the promoter of getting all the Christians together, which would be the end run around Catholic doctrine in order to get Catholics agreeing with everybody else and everybody else agreeing with the Catholics. So the Secretariat for Christian Unity was an organization created by the liberals with the approval of the Pope in order to do an end run around the orthodox, classical, roadblock Roman Curia, which the
Is that John 23rd or?
yes, I think the Secretariat was created under John the 23rd, yes, I think so. Next, a year later, the Americans move in because the American bishops had a crusading sense of converting the Catholic Church to religious liberty. The American bishops really thought that the church needed to get with it. We American Catholics, we know how. And all of the bishops in the rest of the world need to learn from us how you get in sync with the modern world. And so next, within the Secretariat and on the council floor, the American bishops backed Father Murray's alternate liberal text, because once the traditional text had been thrown out, Father Courtney Murray came forward with a liberal text. And the American bishops backed it because the American bishops religiously believe, the American bishops have a Sunday morning Catholicism, unfortunately. And their real religion, and many of the American Catholic bishops, was liberty. It was American liberty. And they would say, thanks to wonderful American liberty, we Catholics are able to practice our Catholicism in the United States. Thanks to wonderful American liberty, on Sunday morning we can be Catholics. That's not a good deal. It's not thanks to American liberty that we have the right to be Catholics. It's thanks to God that we have the right to be Catholics. And to give credit to a liberal state for being liberal enough to allow the truth is to put the truth on the wrong footing. It's to make the truth subordinate to liberty instead of liberty subordinate to truth. Our Lord didn't say that liberty will make truth. He said truth will make liberty. He said the truth will make you free. That's what our Lord said. In other words, liberty rests upon truth, not truth upon liberty. So, another interesting point there, Father Murray was such a liberal when the council started that his superiors forbade him to go to the Second Vatican Council, and therefore he missed the session of '62. I think Michael Davis points this out in the book. Do you know who got him permission to get to '63, to the second session of the council? Yep, Cardinal Spellman. Now, Cardinal Spellman passes for being a conservative. But we've got some of his wartime sermons and speeches in the library. He was a liberal. Cardinal Spellman was a liberal. And it's because he's a liberal that he promoted Murray and made sure that Murray attended the council.
Didn't use Murray as a
Peritus, may well be. And do you know who Cardinal Spellman always said was one of his friends?
Franklin.
Pius II. Pius XII. Spellman passed for being a friend of Pius XII. The whole church before Vatican II was worm-eaten in a certain way. I'm not saying Pius XII was worm-eaten, but if he really was friendly with the Cardinal Spellman, he didn't really know what he was doing. Because Cardinal Spellman was a strict conservative in outer things, but the inner doctrines, he's a liberal. And he was, because he was an Americanist. He was an Americanist. I can prove it from a book in the library if any of you doubt it. So he was very strict in, oh, beautiful biretta and beautiful Kappa Magna, cloak, all of the trimmings and frills and furbelows. But as for doctrine, he believed in America.
Was he also the military ordinary?
I don't know. Yes?
He was sometime.
I was stationed in Berlin from 61 to 63.
Yes.
62 for Christmas. I'm almost positive he was there.
Yes.
The same mass.
Yeah, it could be.
Because it just comes
Yeah.
to mind.
Yeah.
He must have had that job for 25 years, because he was, even during, he had it during World War II and even during Vietnam. I know he was in Korea.
Well,
And
he was.
he
Yeah.
worked at home.
In fact, I met him. I shook his hand.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid he was a liberal. But a lot of those liberals were strict on the outside and soft on the inside. And then when Vatican II came, the softness inside simply broke outside. And they all just threw away the berettas, threw away the vestments, threw away, and began dancing with everybody else. So, the American bishops backed Father Murray's alternate liberal text. In 1964, a bitter fight took place. The Declaration on Religious Liberty became a separate schema, and it was bitterly fought over in 3 drafts. The Religious Liberty there was a document that had more drafts. The final draft was the 6th draft. It had more drafts than any other document in the Council, because I don't think any other document was quite as deadly. And finally, after the fight in 1964, 3 more drafts were fought over in 1965, but the 6th and final draft was approved by the Council, on the Council floor. It was approved by the Pope, and it was approved by Father Murray. So it went through. Now, what is that? So that's the story of the clash. Now, what is in the document? And this is what we've got, this is what Michael Davis looks at in chapters 17 to 23. The problem of the doctrine, then the fact that the article number 1 in the document is in 15 sections. And in the first section, when a lot of the church fathers still refused to sign the document, do you know what Paul VI did? He had a sentence put into the first paragraph saying, this document is not out of line with tradition. Nothing of the rest was changed. Do you think that you change what's in a document simply by saying what's in the document without altering one letter of the contents of the document? Of course you don't. But by simply putting in, this document is in line with tradition, a lot of the resistance collapsed and the document finally was signed. So Article 1 is no solution. In fact, the document demotes Catholicism. It's a demotion of Catholicism, which is hardly mitigated by a few little breaks thrown in, and which is universally recognized as being out of whack with tradition. And the gist of it is that error from now on is given rights. And that's the error, and that's the mistake, that's the heresy. And dignity is misunderstood. Why, looking just at this little schema down here once more of man's moral liberty and man having an end outside himself and man being an end in himself, can anybody tell me what are here the 2 versions of human dignity? How is here human dignity correctly understood, and how is human dignity here falsely understood? Anybody care to explain? What's the dignity of the mind to attain the truth outside it? For a Catholic, what's the dignity of the mind for a liberal? To think whatever it likes. What is the dignity of a man's life as far as a Catholic is concerned?
Eternal salvation.
Exactly. And what is the dignity of a man's life as far as the liberal is concerned?
Happiness.
Yes, that a man be himself, self-fulfillment. That a man be himself. On the liberal calculation, does Lenin have dignity? Vladimir Lenin. Yes. On a Catholic calculation, does Lenin have dignity? No. Not to speak of, no. No, because he's made a complete mess of his life, because he's fought against God, and therefore he's definitely not achieved what God gave him his life in order to achieve. He's roasting in the fires of hell, undoubtedly. See, again, the dignity depends upon whether the end is outside or the end is inside. If man is an end in himself, then he is dignified simply by being a man. And any man is dignified as a man. Who does that remind you of? Any man is simply and purely dignified simply and purely by being a man. JP2, absolutely. That's the false idea of human dignity. What's the Catholic idea of human dignity? What's an example of a really dignified human being for Catholics?
Any saint.
Exactly. Any saint. Exactly right. Sanctity is real human dignity, because that's a man being fulfilled with regard to God. The liberal is the man being fulfilled simply by puffing out his chest and thinking he's a hotshot. And maybe a few other people thinking he's a hotshot as well, regardless of God. See the two completely different ideas of dignity? And then the document starts out with, modern man ever more aware of his dignity. That's a banana skin right there. The document starts on the wrong foot. Modern man, ever more aware of his dignity, is requiring freedom and limits on government. That's pure American, right? Human dignity requires limits on government. That's pure American. So, let's have a look at Michael Davis's 8-chapter presentation of this deadly document. 17. The final text of the Declaration, Dignitatis Humanae, or DH, must be compared with Catholic doctrine, because the last-minute traditional addition to Article 1 left the untraditional parts of DH completely unchanged. How smart do you think those bishops were, who switched their vote when the Pope simply threw into Article 1 a statement that none of this contradicts tradition? They weren't that smart, were they? That's just like the Bonini changing Article 7 of the Introduction to the Mass, while the rite itself remains completely unchanged. Correct? Poor people, people don't think. People, not even the Catholic bishops can think. Well, it's easy to say for you and me. I mean, if you and I had been Catholic bishops in that atmosphere, I'm sure that you and I would have gone along with it. I'm sure I would have. Jim?
Is there any way that tradition can be destroyed completely?
No.
Or changed to such a way that it's unrecognizable?
Do you know what our Lord says in his Passion? That's not he says, that he said, but not at the moment of his passion. But when he was going into Jerusalem and all the children were, rah, 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 the Messiah, we love David, we love David, we love Jesus, we love Jesus. All the children were bouncing up and down, and the Pharisees were furious. The Pharisees were, can't you shut up these brats? And what our Lord replied, do you remember?
The very stones.
If these children were to be made to keep quiet, the very stones of the street would get up and salute tradition. And if the liberals succeeded in killing off every traditionalist and shutting down the Society of St. Pius X, the stones in the street would get up and speak tradition.
So tradition stands by itself?
It takes some support. I mean, somebody has to stand for it.
Well, I mean, they can't destroy it.
No, they can't destroy it. It's going to be there. But
American bishops must have thought, in as much as you just gave it lip service in Article 1, that sooner or later tradition would overwhelm what they didn't like about this thing. If they really had some questions about it.
yes.
I wonder if they even thought.
They didn't think. They had this warm feeling about liberty and a warm feeling about the church, about Catholicism. So if you get the two together, we'll have a double warm feeling. And double warm feelings are really very nice. So let's have a double warm feeling and let's mush together the church and liberty. We'll have the best of both worlds then.
Well, originally they rejected it, right? And then something persuaded them to change their vote.
Yes. Originally, it's not the American bishops that were rejected. I think it was a bunch of Spanish bishops, especially, that were standing out. And the Pope won them over. It wasn't the American bishops. No, the American bishops were all for the document, no problem. It was some old-fashioned bishops who were still insisting. And so the Pope simply threw in an extra statement that it's a perfectly traditional document, without changing anything else in the document. And the resistance largely collapsed. That was the prestige of the Pope. If the Pope said it, then that's it. If the Pope says that black is white, then black is white. That's wrong.
It's maybe so strong even today.
It's very strong even today. That's exactly right.
You know, I must tell you this. After the Civil War, I asked many people, and Franco was at the height, if the Pope would command you anything, or Franco, whom would you obey? And to a man, everybody talking will obey the Pope.
Yes.
That's so strong.
Yes, that's right.
And it's legally honored today.
Absolutely. It's exaggerated veneration of the Pope. They assume that the Pope is infallible in everything he says and does, and that's just not true. He's infallible only under certain strict conditions. All right, let's move on. So the last-minute traditional addition to Article 1, here it is, I'll give it to you. This demand for freedom regards firstly the free exercise of religion in society. Vatican II declares that this demand is in accordance with truth and justice and in accordance with church tradition. That's what they threw in. It's completely false. Completely false. So, Dignitatis Humanae 19, in effect, reduces Catholicism from being the one true religion to being merely one religion amongst many. And that's logical. If you say that the state must tolerate all religions equally, must treat all religions equally, you're saying that all religions, that Catholicism is just one amongst many other religions. In actions which speak louder than words, you're saying that Catholicism is just one amongst many other religions. It's true that Dignitatis Humanae does allow the state to help religion by the state's protecting public order in a broad sense. So there are a few little tidbits to tradition, a few little cap taken off here and there to tradition in the document, but mostly it's just brand new doctrine. It's liberalism. So it's liberalism with a sprinkling of tradition on top, just to deceive people and make them think that it's still Catholic doctrine. But Catholics, 21, from far left to far right, have all recognized, and that's interesting, not only the liberals, not only the conservatives attack the doctrine, the conservatives attack the document for being irreconcilable with tradition. The liberals admit that the document is irreconcilable with tradition. It's not only the conservatives that attack the document. They've alike recognized there's a problem in reconciling Dignitatis Humanae with tradition. And the key point, 22 in heavy letters, is that the document affirms and tradition denies that propagators of error in public have a right to be tolerated by the state. That's the exact point of difference. Now, you may say that's not a big deal. But if you spell out the logic, it is a big deal. Because the logic is this. The logic ends up, in one case, man is an end in himself, and his dignity requires that he be entitled to what he likes. And the other is that man is not an end in himself, and that man, the state, must operate on the principle of helping a man to achieve that end which is outside him. So the difference, as you have it there, propagators of error in public have a right to be tolerated by the state. It doesn't look like a big deal. But the difference is as big as man is God or God is God. That's what it comes down to, logically. So it looks like a little, it's like a raindrop falling somewhere on the continental divide of the United States. If it falls 2 yards to the left, it's going to the raindrop will finish up in the Pacific. If it falls 2 yards further to the right, it'll finish up in the Mexican Gulf, go down the Mississippi and finish up in the Mexican Gulf. Just a tiny little difference in the beginning, and logically it ends up completely different. So if you think that the propagators of error in public have a right to be tolerated by the state, ultimately you think that man is God. Whereas if you think the propagators of error do not have in public a right to be tolerated by the state, then you're admitting that God is God. It's a huge difference over what looks like just a tiny disagreement. But think about it, and read the book. Nor, 23, can such a right be based on the human person's dignity, because error takes away a man's dignity. That, of course, is a Catholic or a liberal proposition to say that error takes away a man's dignity. It's a Catholic proposition, exactly. For the liberals, error doesn't take away a man's dignity. I think that 2 and 2 is 5. Oh, master, you are thinking, you are great, you are a man. I think that 2 and 2 is 4. Oh, master, you are great, you are a man. You are thinking, regardless of the content. The liberals don't care about content, which is why words have lost their meaning, which is why books have lost their meaning, which is why they can't think, why they don't think. It's all just man, 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 and feeling good about yourself.
I think the liberals do care about content, and when someone speaks the truth...
Oh, well, to that extent. That's interesting. Yes, of course, that is an inconsistency in liberals. True. The liberals can tolerate any error, but they can't tolerate the truth. I just said I had a dumb liberal over here saying 2 and 2 is 4. Oh, yes, master. But of course, 2 and 2 is 5. Yes, master. 2 and 2 is 50. Yes, master. 2 and 2 is 4. What's that? 2 and 2 is 4. You can't say that, because if you say that, all of the rest of us will be put out of business. Therefore, you've got to be put out of business. If you say the truth, you've got to be put out of business, because the truth discredits all the liberal errors. And that's a continual inconsistency in liberals. The sweet liberals will tolerate the truth, but the real liberals will not tolerate the truth. And that's why they smash Catholic tradition. They don't mind anybody else talking nonsense, but anybody talking truth rains on their parade. And therefore, anybody talking truth has got to be put out of business. Error takes away a man's dignity. That's the proper understanding of dignity. But Father Courtney Murray had the completely liberal understanding of dignity. Namely, simply by the fact of my thinking, I have dignity regardless of what I think. Finally, 24-25, Father Murray died in 1967, leaving to the Church a legacy of liberalizing and Americanizing ideas. But Fenton was also American, remember, and Fenton was a true blue Catholic, so not all American Catholics are Americanists. For instance, in 1969, all prayers irreconcilable with DH were removed from the Universal Church's liturgy. That was the new missal. The appendices are a little interesting. None of Vatican II's teaching had extraordinary infallibility, and only what was traditional had ordinary infallibility, and therefore nobody is bound to admit the nonsense in the document on religious liberty. It doesn't come under either extraordinary or ordinary infallibility. Next, between Pius IX's authoritative teaching in Quanta Curans, the syllabus, and on the one side, and Dignitatis Humanae on the other side, there is, if not direct contradiction, at least irreconcilability. So the document is going against and you've got on the wing of the Vatican II tradition on the other side, you've got 4 examples of the clash between what the previous popes teach and what Dignitatis Humanae teaches. 3, in many formerly Catholic countries, Dignitatis Humanae opened the way to a grave undermining of Catholic faith and morals, and a notable example was Spain. Because the Vatican kept telling Spain, you must take away the special status of the Catholic faith. You must stop forbidding Protestants in public. And any state like Colombia or the Valley, in the canton of the Valley in Switzerland, or Spain, any state which still wanted to give, any Catholic state which still wanted to give any privilege to the Catholic religion was damned by Vatican II. And under pressure, Franco undid the state privilege of Catholicism in Spain. And the result is that Spain today is a mess. Oh, it's dead. Father Anglis, who's a Spaniard, tells you Spain is dead.
Rick Rader's daughter-in-law said that all over Spain, they're very strong for Clinton because somebody has convinced the Spaniards that Clinton is doing everything he can to stand by abortion. A deliberate falsification.
The Spaniards have gone crazy. It's incredible. Yes. Yes, it is. That's correct. In a very short time, it's mind-boggling. It's tragic. Dear Spain, great Spain, Catholic Spain, the creator of the Spanish Catholic Empire in the New World, gone. The devil is taking his revenge on poor Spain. So, fourthly, the official spokesman of Dignitatis Humanae at the Council was a Belgian, and he tries to show that the new doctrine is just a development of tradition. But again, it was a real weasel speech. It's well done, it's cleverly done, but it's as false as a $3 bill. The traditional doctrine on a state's tolerating public heresy is laid out in the preparatory schema which was rejected by Vatican II. We saw that in number 13, the traditional schema on religious toleration.
Was that Belgian? Was that Monsignor
De Smet is right, yes. De Smet is right. Sixthly, Pope Pius XII went into this question in a speech called Kyrieschi, and he taught that states may today have to forego exercising their right to repress heresy. In other words, he's saying that in today's circumstances, said Pope Pius XII, who was Catholic, in today's circumstances, the state may not be able to repress heresy, and it may have to back off repressing heresy, but it still has a right to repress heresy. It may be obliged by the facts to back off, but it still has the right. It doesn't lose the right to repress heresy. And it's a completely different thing from the liberals who say that the state has no right to repress heresy. And finally, Michael Davis gives a chronological list from 1960 to 1965 of the events by which Dignitatis Humanae emerged at Vatican II. The book is well worth reading. It's not too easy in parts, but with that schema and with that introduction, you ought to be able to get hold of it, and it's well worth it. It's well worth it because you grasp what the whole problem is about. Tonight, bring any questions you have. I haven't got Unabomber 2 to bring, so I will think in case I have something to bring, in case you haven't got enough questions, but otherwise it's a free-for-all. So line up your questions and bring a stake, an STAKE with matches to light under it if you want to burn me.